helping you with Acorn and RISC computing.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Chris, for inviting Andrew and myself to come and speak to you at your January meeting. Happy New Year to you all. And as I've been saying to all my customers this week, I sincerely hope that 2022 is better for everybody. So I'm sure you will all echo that. We had an interesting year last year. Very difficult to get some things done. And on the other hand, we had people that were working from home, stuck in their houses. So they tapped away at their keyboards. And that's got to be a good thing if you are a software developer or you're trying to sort things out for future release. So we had a reasonable amount of software that has been progressing. Some of you may know all of it, some of it, maybe even none of it. I'll just very quickly go through the 5 main projects that RISC OS developments has been dealing with. Our primary and our oldest project is Iris, the web browser. Andrew and I still can't think of a better name, so I think if everyone's got used to it, we may have to stick to that. Andrew may disagree with me at some point, you never know. But that's been continually updated throughout the year. It's had better specifications, even up until the last few weeks, where I've been told that we now have the updated engine. There's a new version of GDK. And this is one of the reasons we've done Iris the way that we have, is so that when the outside world, I won't say the real world, because really RISC-OS is the real world. We know that, it's just nobody else has quite gotten on yet. When things outside change, we can track those changes. Now, we can't always get everything working instantly, but an awful lot can. So with the new engine that came out towards the back end of last year, we've now got better security and various other items. Andrew will demonstrate all of this software. I'm apparently better at the talking, and Andrew is definitely better at showing things to people. He's done more screen sharing than I have. So he will hopefully entice you and show you the latest version. He did ask me to download it earlier and said, here it is, it's in this directory and this is the name. And I go, oh, my server must not be working. Can't work that one out. And looked as though we hadn't quite got the right file in the right place, but we have now. So I can say that I've actually got the latest version. I've had a very, very short play with it. And yes, it seems to be very good. It'll be interesting to track the changes and use it in a real world scenario over the next 2 or 3 weeks. I'm not the technical one. I've said this at many shows. You know, don't ask me too technical a question because I can't give you an answer. I know a man who can, or various people. But they do like to give me new software. And for whatever reason, how I use computers is very good at breaking things. So our various developers don't like to see my phone number come up because it's, Richard, what's he broken now? But hopefully it's only me that suffers this. And as the various people start to play with our new software, they will be able to appreciate it. Another piece of software that came out last year was Pinboard 2. That, again, was an update on the first version. I guess most of you will have that. Very, very useful, and it certainly makes me enjoy RISC-OS an awful lot more. We also released Impression Publisher last year. I wasn't quite as involved in that project as Andrew was, so Andrew will give you a little bit of talk as well as most probably showing that to you. Landman 98, that was finally open sourced. It's taken about a decade most probably to get that all together. Now that we've got it open sourced, of course, though, we've now got to improve it, or at least that's what we feel. So there will be work. We have ideas, and we have a game plan between us that we hope to see certain things coming along. And of course, our other major project, apart from Iris, that's most probably really taken most of last year, is the network stack. So what have we been up to in the last year with the network stack? I have a very interesting sheet here. I'll hold this up for you. So I will try and make this as interesting as possible, but again, I apologize, this is most probably fairly technical, so some people, if you've got questions when Andrew's doing his demonstration, I'm sure he'll be able to link into those. So a new MBAF manager has been created so that the source can become fully open. And this manager combines the functionality of the old one with the new functionality that our new stack requires, bearing in mind that the original Acorn TCP IP stack, please nod your head if I've got this right, Andrew, is about 30 years old. Andrew just opens his mouth and looks interesting. Okay, but yeah, it goes way back to Acorn days.
Well, 25 is probably closer, but yes.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.
It's dark ages as far as computers are concerned.
Yeah, so it's done very well over the last 25, 30 years, and various parts of it were still locked, and all sorts of odds and ends have been going on with RISC OS. So this is one of those things that had to be done. It is now in C, so that should give us better future maintainability for the MBAF manager. One of the other things that our developers did is that they created a tool so that we could import the OpenBSD sources. And in creating that tool, it allows us to automatically make adjustments so that the code is RISC OS friendly. It also applies our patches, and this in turn makes it easier for us to import updates from future OpenBSD development as and when they come along. We've made an interface between the core BSD networking code and the RISC OS world. One of the reasons that we had to do this is that some of the concepts that are in use now didn't exist, and also that they're different between the real world, the outside world, and the RISC OS world. So we've had to create solutions there with this interface so that the two can effectively talk together. We've got a new internet module, and this supports IPv4 as expected, and really now it also supports IPv6 straight out of the box. So that was an awful lot of hard work for them to get done. The concepts in IPv6, these incredibly long numbers, not like the old 192.168 that us human beings can relate to. IPv6 is a little bit more complicated. I'm not even going to pretend to understand it, but mostly used outside when you're talking to the internet. Routers know about it, but there will be occasions as we go forward with RISC OS where we're going to need that. So that's very nicely put in there. And we've had various people that have been able to actually test it as well. So we do know that it works. It's not just a concept that's been programmed and put in. It is something that has been tested. And also in the new internet module, we have core code now for 802.11 functions. And that is the bit that you need to have the Wi-Fi hooks. So I think big smiles from all of us. We're getting closer. The gap that used to be that big is coming down now. So hopefully you'll all appreciate that. I know Andrew had his notebooks. I still want one, Andrew, but whether I'll get one, we'll have to see. Next, we imported and converted some tools from the OpenBSD world. So ipconfig, that's the last major update that had was back in October, just around the time of the show. We've got ping, we've got ping 6 for IPv6, we've got ARP, netstat, root, and DH client. Again, if you want to know exactly what each one of those are or have a better explanation, write that down on your question list and address that to Andrew, and he'll be able to answer some of those for you.
Thanks, Richard.
We've also updated quite a few of the drivers because, again, OpenBSD handles things in a different way to the old stack. So RISC OS needs to be tweaked and pushed and pulled, and the drivers are the best way, the sensible way to do that. So these updates really have been overdue for a few years, but they're now getting in there. This extra functionality has been added on these existing drivers. So far, we have the EtherTH for the IMX6 family, EtherUSB for Pi, Pi 2, Pi 3, and plug-in USB devices. And we also have an Ether GENet for Pi 4, because the Pi 4 unfortunately does things very differently to the way the previous Pi generations did. And I believe we now have one or two very sketchy framework ones for one or two Wi-Fi devices. Haven't been able to test them just yet, but we're getting an awful lot closer on that one. We also added a resolver so that source can become fully open, which is unlike the existing resolver module. It uses the latest OpenBSD code, of course. And another reason for having to do the resolver module was that newer calls were needed for IPv4 and 6. Agnostic hostname lookups I've got written here. And then in brackets, makes it easier to port code to work under IPv6. So another technical section. We've also made a new DHCP module so that it's easier to convert the existing OpenBSD client to a proper RISC OS module. After that, we put it all together in an easy to install update. And we have a number of beta testers who are playing with this code. It's not just 2 or 3 of us now, it's a little bit wider than that. And they have been very helpful in helping us to find some things that hadn't been spotted, because of course everyone uses the internet and uses their computer in completely different ways. As I say, I'm fairly good at breaking things generally because I just sort of go, well, why doesn't it work? It should do it. I expect it to do it like this. And the guys say, no, don't worry about it. We've sorted it. We'll get you all up and running. And within sometimes hours, sometimes a few days, that problem is resolved. Let's see. Oh, and very, very importantly, although I can't say that I'm doing that this evening, going to enjoy myself as I'm at home and have no driving. Apparently there were quite a few, well done Rick, quite a few caffeinated beverages have been consumed to do with this network stack. Maybe we ought to have one of those little files that Acorn used to hide away that just has a little tally, so many beers, so many cups of tea, so many cups of coffee. Further plans for the TCP/IP stack. I've touched on some of this, the IPv6 auto configuration that was on my London talk. That's now been done. So in the last couple of months, that's not a future, that's something that's actually in place. We have also got work started on an Ether CPSW. Excuse me. That particular module is for the titanium boards. So I believe that's got every, within reason, every machine in the RISC OS world that's currently running that is able to run the new stack has now got a driver for it, which is excellent. As I said, we've also got the basic frameworks for some of the Wi-Fi drivers. We had a need for someone to build a replacement configuration and management GUI, because obviously we've got a lot more buttons that we can press and boxes to tick with the greater functionality that's available, and the current software that we've got in RISC OS can't really cope with that. So we were looking for someone, and during December, we've now got somebody on board who has said that they would really like to do that. So hopefully shortly this year, work will get started on that as well. And of course, with all of this going on, we've got to make documentation. Currently, that's not really there. But that's, again, that is on our list. There needs to be very sensible documentation. It's one of the requirements that I know the guys at RUL are always keen on having. Anything that goes in, documentation should be at least 10 times bigger than the software code. Otherwise, it hasn't been properly done. But I don't think we'll quite go to that extreme. And that's most probably really most of the stuff to do with the network stack that I can tell you about. I did speak to the developer about 6:30 tonight and asked him, apart from his Christmas holidays and wishing him a happy new year, what has happened to the stack. And he was very pleased to tell me he had been tinkering with it, and it's approximately 15% faster than it was before Christmas. So bearing in mind this is beta software, and the speed goes up sometimes, and then we find a problem and the speed seems to slow down. It's really encouraging that they've started the optimization, and over the last 6 weeks we've got that sort of speed increase. Just in pure raw data terms, the only figure that I'm going to quote to you is that on the old stack, getting data out in a raw format, 49.5 meg per second. We've actually seen 51 meg per second with the new stack. So again, things are going in the right direction. We're pleased to see that. Bearing in mind how much larger the new stack is and how many more features there are there and how much more work it has to do, it's doing things in a different way. RISC OS software has always been small, neat, tidy and fast. We're now entering a phase maybe with RISC OS software where we're wanting to advance. We can't write things from scratch, as Acorn did, unfortunately. There's not a large enough pool of ARM coders out there. Machines are changing very, very quickly. You know, how many people have an iPad 1 and now we're on 5th generation, and there are masses of differences between. When you're Apple and you are in the trillions, I believe, in their valuation now, they can pour money into that and spend many man years in the space of a month getting things sorted. I think we do very well in the RISC OS world, but some of the new software that we've got certainly is an awful lot larger and is much more complicated and will do more. Maybe it is a little bit too fat, but unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going to be able to quite get down to that really lean, mean machine code that we used to have in the past. But the important thing is that all of you watching will have machines that can cope with the new world, can cope with the new things. And the goal is always, yes, we will try to make it faster, but it's got to be at least the same speed as it always used to be. So I use the stack every day on my IMX6. As you may know, I also run some IMX6 based servers here. And a good real world thing is to put your beta software on there. And I've done that on 2 or 3 occasions. And I've got machines that customers work on and are attached to, and I don't have any problems. So for beta software, I am very impressed what our 2 developers have done, our lead and his number 2. It really is quite something. And I hope if any of you are testing it, then you can agree with me on that. And we really can't wait to release it to you. As ever, though, Andrew and I, being the cautious people that we are, will release it when it's hopefully ready for you and is not going to break quickly. It may break in the extreme, but we want it to be good. We want this experience. You install it, and apart from maybe things that we aren't aware of or we haven't tested, it's surprises that catch us out, not the run of the mill, not going to your shared drive on your NAS. You know, all of that should just work. And as far as I'm concerned, yes, it most certainly does. Does anyone, I don't know if this is how you do it, Chris and Rick, does anyone want, do people want to ask me questions on what I've said, or do you just want to save that to the end, in which case I'll just hand over to Andrew?
Entirely up to you, Richard.
Does anyone have...
just a quick one, Richard.
Mm-hmm. Hello,
At the very start, you mentioned IP config. Did you mean IF config?
I did, sorry.
Right.
I read one thing and said something else.
Thanks.
Well, I'll take it from that silence then. I'll go ahead and mute myself, and I'll look forward to seeing what you're going to show us, Andrew. Over to you.
Right, well, thanks for that, Richard. So, okay, good evening from me and Happy New Year from me to everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. I think we're just giving you a good overview of the various projects. So I'm going to dive right in and start by sharing the screen. So one moment while we sort that out. Hopefully you can all see a RISC desktop.
Looks good.
Excellent, thank you.
Yep.
Helpful to have a verbal confirmation. Right. I've just spotted a question that came in the chat. So before I dive into my Iris demo, I will just answer the chat question, which was asking about a firewall for the TCP/IP stack. It's not something that we've written yet, but we are aware that it's something that people are asking about. And we have had an offer of some code to do a firewall from a third party who has some experience in that area. So the answer is yes, it's on the roadmap, and watch this space. We don't envisage any major challenges on that front. But on the other hand, that will be quite tied into the sort of updated configuration tools that we're doing for the new stack. So it's not something you're going to see sort of in the next 6 weeks. But yeah, watch this space. Okay, so now on to the Iris demonstration. Now this version of Iris is, as promised in the pre-meeting advertising, quite literally hot off the press. It arrived in at sort of midnight last night, so I've had sort of 8 hours of work day to put it through its paces and prepare it for public viewing. So if it explodes on us, you come pre-warned. That's why it's marked beta software. So we'll start from the beginning. So we'll double click on Iris. This version, as you'll see, is January 2022. Obviously contains a number of improvements over the version that we put out before the London show back in October. The biggest change since the London show has been in the area of font handling.
Andrew?
Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Somebody said that somebody was unmuted. I think we're actually hearing Steph. Any chance you could maybe...
Excuse me, one moment, please. My apologies.
Thanks, Andrew.
Right, okay. So, yeah, the big area that's received attention is in the font handling. And I will show demonstration of that in a minute. You can see on the front page, if you're familiar with the existing Iris, that things have changed font-wise. This has been accompanied by a change to the actual core engine. As Richard said, we try and track the WebKit engine, and this WebKit engine is, as far as we know, the latest version from the back end of December in 2021. So we're as up to date as we can be on the actual browser engine, and also in the GTK user interface elements that Iris uses to translate between the sort of Linux way of doing things and the RISC-OS way of doing things. That is also up to date with the latest GTK. So sort of major behind the scenes changes, and a full change log is included with this version. There are a number of bug fixes for crashes. You can see coping with screen DPI, complete revamp of the font system, and we've also improved the menus and made the actual usability of the program fit with closer to the browse model for menus and user interface where possible, because we know a lot of people enjoyed the old web browser. So I'll show the new font system first. The most obvious is if we look in the choices, and we now have a font section where all the different default fonts and things can be set. Because Iris uses an engine that comes from the Linux world, we don't use the RISC-OS font system for display of the fonts. Instead, using the sort of more, I'll say, sophisticated free type font system, which supports Unicode fonts and modern open type typefaces. One of the challenges we have with fonts is that a lot of the web presupposes typefaces like Arial, and Arial is not a free font, although it comes with most computers. It is in fact one that is a commercial font. Microsoft include it with Windows under a commercial license. And so we can't just stick Arial into Iris. Well, you could, but we can't. So we have to try and provide fonts that will give the same visual effect without breaking the licensing agreement. So we've moved to the free sans and free serif range of fonts, which are designed to be typographically compatible with Arial, and Times New Roman. So when we say typographically compatible, what we mean is that the characters take the same amount of space, such that the formatting can match between typefaces. I'll show this in a very distinct visual manner by bringing up one of the demo websites, Hexus. Now, you'll note here that things look neatly formatted in the latest version of Iris. If I put that to the back and bring up the previous version of Iris, as a screenshot I made earlier, you will see some distinct differences. If you look, the Facebook company's new name is Meta, you'll see that the line breaks are in a different place and that the text flows below the assigned space for it to appear in. Similarly, on the right here, we see most commented. It's displayed correctly in the latest Iris, but spills off the bottom of the box in the older version. If we compare this to a screenshot of Chrome that was taken today, and try and put these side by side, you will see that the word endings are in exactly the same place between Chrome on the right and Iris on the left. The importance of this may seem minor, but in terms of getting accurate page rendering, it's essential that things take more or less the same amount of space, because so much of the web has moved to accurate positioning of content. There is an assumption that something will take the same amount of space on multiple platforms. And so the level of sort of degradability that we see of pages in terms of correct content display is often dependent on the font metrics being used. This is a far cry from the web of old, where back in the earlier days, you didn't even have any control over font faces beyond specifying that it was a heading. You couldn't even say bold or italic. You had to say strong or emphasized to take away from the actual physical effect being used. The idea being that web content could be displayed in any font, in any style. These days, of course, the web designers are much more artistically trained, and so there is an expectation that pages will look exactly the same across browsers. Through the new font engine, that is exactly what happens in Iris. The net result is that your pages will look exactly as the designers intended, and when you view a website on RISC OS, it looks exactly the same as it would do in Chrome or Firefox. And of course, it's now all fully configurable in the choices as I demonstrated. Other areas that have changed are to do with input into text boxes. We had reports of some people saying that some of the text input into fields was quite slow. You can see that that's tracking my typing instantaneously. So that's now considerably better. And also on machines like the ARMX6, where it used to be a bit slower, that sort of matches at the same sort of typing speed. That should give a nice quality of life improvement. On the menu side, we've got a lot more save options. You can save frames, you can export plain text, links, images. We can navigate, if we point to a link, we'll navigate link, we can open it in new windows, open it in new tabs, copy to the clipboard, add to the bookmarks. We've got history hot list menus. We have the password manager. Essentially, it's all about quality of life and trying to deliver a browser that is more akin to the complete experience that you would have had in Browse on NetSurf, rather than the bare bones browser that we delivered initially. One of the coolest new things is the web inspector. It's still a wee bit on the slow side, but basically this allows you to completely disassemble a web page and actually see visually the properties of each aspect. So when you click on something, you can see things highlight as we go through each individual element. It will highlight the properties of what is currently selected. You can see stuff happening basically. So these development tools allow an analysis of pages that you're working on. And you've seen this kind of thing in Chrome and what have you, but we now have a web browser in RISC OS that has all the same development properties that you would have in other browsers on other platforms present in a RISC OS browser. So we really are at a point where we're delivering a very full and rich experience now in Iris for our users. There have been a number of bug fixes in the latest release, and that's seen a new release of the Army ABI support module. You may have picked up over the last sort of 2 or 3 weeks, there's been a new release of GCC compiler tools that brings in the Army ABI support module that was developed for Iris and various other bits of technology that are all stemming from Iris into the GCC compiler toolchain. So the GCC is the free C compiling tools for RISC OS, and the GCC tools available to everyone can now take advantage of the various bits of tech that have been implemented for Iris. We've also seen the GCC 10 work that powers Iris backported to the RISC OS environment, so users can get hold of GCC 10 now on RISC OS and use that to make RISC OS applications like Iris. Another new feature is the password manager. I don't know about you, but I always got very frustrated having to log in all the time on the RISC-OS Open website. We can now save our password information into Iris. And then if I go to the login, you can see it's automatically filled my information in so that I don't have to type that in every time. And you can manage that password via the Save Passwords window from the icon bar menu. Iris supports both web content and also local HTML files, as you would expect. We've spent time in the latest version ensuring compatibility with other RISC OS applications as far as HTML content is concerned, so that things work as expected if you're using it to view documentation and things on the RISC OS platform. Iris has strong cut and paste facilities, so we can highlight a selection in Iris and copy paste it straight into another application. Similarly, going backwards, we can highlight something in here and paste it into field in Iris, and off we go. You might say, well, that's exactly what you would expect from a web browser, and it absolutely is. But of course, RISC OS hasn't been well blessed with this in the past. So to be able to do this kind of web browsing on RISC OS in a natural, organic way, where you have a browser that feels like a RISC OS application, at least for the most part, with standard RISC OS dialog boxes, it's a huge step forwards. You can see there's now a private browsing system so that you can look at sites that you don't want to appear in your history for whatever reason. We can now open links by right-clicking on them to start them in a new tab. We support new tabs, and you can also open links in new windows. So if we go and press menu over that, navigate link, open a new window, you'll see that the browser will open the new window. So just like ordinary PC or Mac web browsers, we can have the same fulfilling web experience on RISC OS that you would expect on the other platforms. This whole demonstration, by the way, is coming over the new TCP/IP stack. I can't really demonstrate a great deal for you on the new IP stack, but you can see if I do help. You'll see that it's running on 5.91 from October last year. You might be surprised that that's not more recent, but a lot of the recent development has yet to feed back in terms of new test versions to run while they're optimizing the performance. So the October version is still the current one that we're running internally. Now, if you're an existing RISC OS shareholder, then the new version of IRIS is available for download right now. We put it in the usual download location, so you can literally grab it right away. Another change that we've made recently, it's a small change, but I think helpful, is some of the modules and things that previously existed within the IRIS application have now moved out so that they can be standard system modules shared between applications. This allows IRIS to behave more neatly with other applications. Moving on to the TCP/IP work, we talked a little bit, or Richard talked about the work towards Wi-Fi. There are essentially three stages to Wi-Fi. You have, at the very lowest level, you have a hardware driver, and that needs to be able to talk to the actual chip that's providing the Wi-Fi. You then have the TCP/IP stack in the middle, and you have the user interface for configuring the Wi-Fi on the top. The TCP/IP stack now has the 802.11 support in there to actually understand the concepts of Wi-Fi and encryption, etc. So the next step is towards the drivers. As Richard said, there are shell drivers being produced, but more than that, we've also invested in development of the underlying chip communication protocols that are used to access Wi-Fi chips on the current range of available hardware. And basically that means new versions of the SD controllers for everything from Pinboard, Raspberry Pi 0 through to 4, ARM boot, IMX6, other only partially announced platforms. Essentially all the modern platforms that have Wi-Fi capability have had updated SDIO controller drivers produced for them, so that the actual Wi-Fi chips are now visible to RISC OS. So if you now do SDIO devices at the command line on RISC OS, you will actually see the Wi-Fi controllers. I have not got that piece of software running on this test machine, unfortunately, so I can't actually do that in front of you. You'll have to take my word for it. But suffice to say that all the major platforms now can do that. Now that work is being fed out by Rule, via Rule, and will be done so hopefully this month. We're just finalising things after Christmas. We've had a hiatus over Christmas, so we're just finalising that work now. But essentially it's now done. And that also provides an API that is compatible with the Linux and OpenBSD way of doing drivers to allow drivers for Wi-Fi to communicate with the SDIO controllers on the motherboards of all of these platforms. So that should facilitate effectively a drop-in level of SDIO compatibility when porting network drivers. If you're not sure why I'm talking about SD card stuff in the same breath as Wi-Fi, on boards like the Raspberry Pi, you don't have a lot of expansion channels. In order to add technologies like Wi-Fi to the processor, they had to come up with ways of actually connecting that in. You didn't necessarily have a PCI Express bus on the older Raspberry Pi boards, for example. You do on the Pi 4, but not so much on the older Raspberry Pis. Similarly on BeagleBoard, PandaBoard, etc. So the way they put in Wi-Fi controllers was to actually hang it off the SD card bus via a protocol called SDIO. And so that's why this work is needed, is because previously the SD card bus was only usable as an SD card for RISC OS. And as we move forwards, we're going to need to be able to address the SDIO bus in a much more flexible manner, so as we can use it as a full communication bus for the purposes of doing the Wi-Fi drivers. That actually has resulted in new faster drivers for the Pi 0 to Pi 3 SDIO, SD card handling. So existing Pi owners will see a boost, and a number of the other platforms will also see performance gains. I believe IMX6, ARMBook, and other platforms will see speed benefits from the new SDIO work that has been done. So moving on from that, the Pinboard 2 work is available to anybody who wishes to test it. All you have to do is write to us. Same on the TCP/IP, by the way. If you want to try out the TCP/IP work, all you have to do is write to us, and we will add you to the mailing list for receiving the updates on the sort of beta versions. And you do have to write to us because this is technically beta software. It isn't public release officially, but it's public in the sense that anybody can ask to be a tester. We're not restricting it. It's just that if we actually mark it as being a release version, then there are expectations and support aspects that are expected when something is marked as such, and we're not at a point where we're comfortable in giving those levels of assurances with these pieces of software. So Pinboard 2 has been demonstrated before. You'll see all the little red pins. It allows us to have much more flexibility in backdrops. It allows us to save work directly to the Pinboard. I can go File, Save, and save that text file to the Pinboard. You'll see because it's a file saved to the Pinboard, it doesn't have the pin icon. And that is why it's beta. That's the first time I've seen it crash in a very long time. So no idea what was going on there. Where are we? You can put watermarks in the corner or other places on the screen using draw files. This allows you to apply labels and introduce vector elements to the Pinboard. We've tried to follow the existing Pinboard menu wherever possible. So you'll see that it follows the same formatting as a filer window when you press menu over the selections. It automatically handles things being moved on and off the Pinboard, so I can just simply drag that, or if I was to put a file into our present Pinboard folder, where are we? Pinboard. We can literally copy something into the folder and it immediately detects and it appears on the Pinboard. So it really is very much a live, active Pinboard. If I delete the file from that folder, you'll see it will disappear immediately from the Pinboard. So the Pinboard is actively tracking the folder contents. So you really can treat it just like any other folder on your computer. This is quite useful when you're working on documents. If you're not quite sure where you want to save something, you can just save it directly to the Pinboard by drag and drop. The RISC OS save system with drag and drop is wonderful, but it does tend to assume that you have other windows open when you do it. and you don't always have those windows open. So being able to drag and drop to the pinboard is extremely handy. Another new bit of news is that Chris Hall has updated the Impression Publisher manual and is now selling that with our blessing. The new revised manual, we've all had input to it, and Chris has done an awful lot of work to collate everything and do updates and improve, modernize all the pictures, improve the content. And in order to add value to what he's doing, as we know, printed documentation tends to be on the expensive side simply because of the cost of paper. We've provided him with a new version of Publisher that has been updated to be much more friendly with modern machines. It's still a 26-bit application, but basically it's the best version of Impression Publisher that we can do. It works quite happily on any machine from sort of RISC-OS 3.1 to RISC-OS 5, including Virtual Acorn. But of course, 32-bit machines will still need Emula because it is 26-bit code. But if you no longer get sort of crashes if you open CC Shared, for example, on a 32-bit machine, everything works transparently. It's got the latest code. You've got version 5.13 of Publisher. So this literally is the best version of Publisher that we can do. We've updated a lot of the 26-bit modules to 32-bit versions, which allows them to play more nicely with other applications. The mail merge system's been updated. So basically, this is the best version of Publisher you can get, short of Impression X, which is a £60 purchase. If you buy the new manual from Chris, I believe it is somewhere between £25 and £30. I can't quite remember the exact price, but you get, right now, you basically get a voucher that allows you to download this version of Publisher. So even if you're not sort of 100% sold on the new version, the need for a new version of the manual, if you do buy Chris's new manual, you will get this sort of tarted up version of Publisher alongside. So hopefully that's a nice deal for people who use Impression. Of course, Style still remains completely free, and that is available on Pling Store. So really you have versions of Impression now to fit every pocket. You can get Impression Style, which is a superbly capable program, totally free. You can buy the printed manual and get a copy of Impression Publisher with a similar level of polish. And you've also got the Impression X product developed by Richard Keefe as a £60 commercial product, which has additional features on top, should you wish to go down that route. So things ticking along for Impression. Landman 98, free and open source. There's Landman-related work happening behind the scenes. Probably too early to talk much about that beyond saying that we are aware of the need to embrace more modern protocols, Landman-wise, with an eye to modern NAS and Windows compatibility. The current products do still work quite happily with Windows 10 and modern NAS environments, but they do so reliant upon the oldest, least secure methods of SMB networking. Moving forwards, it would be extremely desirable to see the more recent SMB3 protocol implemented under RISC-OS. Full source code is included for Landman 98, so you can see and work on that. It's got a suitable open source license with it, and that has now been available for most of last year, I believe. And that covers our major projects, I think. Some of the development tool work I touched on at the beginning, that's something you'll see more of over the next 12 months. We're still trying to do more in terms of getting the Iris development tools into everybody's hands so that everybody has access to everything that we're working on, both on RISC-OS and in terms of cross-compiling. So again, watch this space. In terms of Iris, we're hoping that 2022 will be the year of Iris, but we don't want to get committed to things at this stage, because one thing we've learned during the COVID lockdown is that timescales can go completely out the window depending on what's going on in the outside world. So we are intending that 2022 will be the year when people, literally every RISC-OS user can get their hands on Iris. As it stands now, it remains a beta product, but anybody who buys the O browser option on Pling Store or has bought it to show with a CD has got free access to the beta of Iris now as a result of that previous purchase, which supports the development of the Iris web browser both now and going forwards. So, yeah, I think that's probably as good a place to stop on the demonstration side of things as anything. Does anybody have any questions?
Away, everybody.
No?
I've got a general question, Andrew. Going Landman 98, when we're looking at Samba 2 and 3, I think it's becoming more critical that we have something like that, or even what about Samba server?
Well, as I said, that's something that we're aware of and are working towards, but we don't have any announcements specifically to make yet, mainly because I don't want to put programmers on the spot by making commitments that we then can't keep. But we are well aware of the need for SMB3. SMB server, yes. Programmer availability is our biggest challenge, if I'm honest. There's so much work and not enough programmers to pass it round. If anybody wants to work on things and would like some backing from RISC-OS developments, we are more than happy to talk to you and provide whatever resources we can to make projects happen. So do talk to us about any ideas and projects you want to work on, or if you're sort of wondering what project you'd like to try, then get in touch with us, because we have all sorts of ideas that we would like people to work on. And even if you're not sort of feeling like you can tackle a whole thing on your own, you may be able to help out one of our existing programmers working on, a smaller part of a bigger whole. There are opportunities to be had. We don't always expect people to work for free either. We do try and sort of have some one foot in the real world. And so, if that's something you're interested in, we're all ears. We do try to be very contactable, so you can pick up the phone, call us, or you can drop us an email. Andrew at riscosdev.com, Richard at riscosdev.com. We are sort of eager to talk to anybody who has, even if it's just to make suggestions or ideas for us to work on. These improvements to the products only come about because people make suggestions and come up with them.
And of course, don't forget, there are always the bounties at WROCC. So, if you think that there's something that you want, do please check their WROCC. And obviously, if WROCC have that bounty going, put some money into that so that they can reach their targets and they can talk to their programmers. I mean, a lot of these programmers are shared completely around the whole group of companies that are doing things in RISC-OS. So, 1 minute or 1 week they're working with us on one of our projects, and at the same time maybe they're working on a bounty for WROCC. But WROCC's bounties can't go forward unless they have the money. So please don't forget them. But at the same time, please also do talk to us as well.
Could I ask what machine the demonstration was running on? Was it a Pi 4?
Well, it was running on one of our Forte machines, which is based on Pi 4 level of architecture.
Yeah. Because I was just thinking, I was actually quite impressed by the speed of it, because I've just recently been selling with Pi 400 with Linux. I haven't put RISC-OS on this particular Pi yet. And the speed of it, I would say, was quite comparable, maybe even slightly faster than Linux. So considering Linux has access to 4 cores on the processor and RISC-OS has just 1, it's doing pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, Iris's performance is something of a mixed bag, if we're honest. There are times at which it feels very slow, and there are times at which it feels quite capable. And I think, from what I'm told, if you set your expectations based on what you experience with Linux on a Raspberry Pi, then you'll often be quite pleased by what Iris will do. If you set your expectations based on a modern PC or Mac, then Iris can feel very sluggish indeed. But then on other sites, it feels absolutely fine. So it does tend to depend on exactly what you're doing with it, how JavaScript heavy it is, and how much sort of real-time interaction with the page is required. That, you know, even if it's quite JavaScript heavy, if it only requires you to interact with it occasionally, then the fact that it might be running a little bit on the slow side is not really a problem. If, on the other hand, you're trying to display Space Invaders in JavaScript, then that could be more of a problem. You know, if it depends. You've got different websites have different needs and requirements in terms of performance and interactivity, but certainly I feel like we're heading in the right direction. As I say, it did feel snappier on typing into text boxes when I was working on it earlier. Having said that, if you're typing into Google, where it's constantly reading what you're doing and trying to look at suggestions and things all the time, then that is less responsive than just typing plain text into a regular field. So, as I say, your mileage will vary. The point is that it works. It's relatively solid. Pages look like what they're supposed to do. The JavaScript works like it's supposed to do. So the majority of websites just work. I was reading this morning about a craze that's going around the world at the moment for something called Wordle, which is a sort of mastermind type game using words, letters. So I thought, well, I'll just try that on Iris, and it just works straight out the box, exactly the same as it did on my PC, with very little visible performance degradation. It seemed just as fluid as it did on my sort of i7 PC across the room. So yeah, it can be great. It doesn't. I would say that fast hardware like Titanium and Pi 4 are its preferred platform. It degrades when used on slower hardware more so than perhaps something like NetSurf, where, you know, NetSurf is pretty fast on more or less any RISC-OS platform, but does less stuff. Iris is a program that can really take advantage of high clock speed modern ARM architectures, but then it's developed with the much more modern development tools and libraries that are optimized for modern platforms. So, you know, it's probably no surprise that, you know, modern software works best on modern processors at the end of the day. But it is a sort of perhaps kick up the pants to people to sort of keep their ARM hardware up to date with the latest models that are available. That sort of continuing on with that RISC PC, Ionics or Pi 1 is, you know, not really where you want to be in 2022, particularly when, you know, a relatively cheap purchase can bring you sort of state-of-the-art RISC-OS performance. You don't need to spend sort of thousands of pounds on RISC-OS kit anymore. You know, you can buy something as cheap as a Pi 400, or you've got things like Forte at sort of around the sort of £200 mark. And then you've got things like sort of the more expensive machines in the sort of hundreds of pounds, but they're all less than £1,000. It's a far cry from when you used to spend £1,800 on a RISC PC. You know, so yeah.
Andrew,
yeah,
I've got some Iris from the Pling store, so I've just gone into the link using my password, and it says Iris is still 24th of October 21.
Yeah, sorry, I think I half finished a sentence.
Right.
The shareholder version is available right now.
Right.
For people who bought it as O browser, they have a very slightly different version, and it's staggered very slightly behind, simply because the shareholders act as essentially a sort of a level of beta testing above internal testing.
That's fair enough.
So basically, usually what happens is that we give them access to it just in case something horrible's occurred. Right. Providing they give us the head nod, then assuming it's a solid version, then it rolls out to everyone else. I think this one feels like it's a version that I can roll out to everybody else. So I would hope see this to everybody by the end of the month. But
Yeah, that's okay. I just thought I'd misunderstood something.
no, that was my apologies. That was literally me. When I thought about the sentence, I was going to say this for shareholders, this for others, and I don't think I ever got round to saying that this for others bit at the end of the sentence because I got carried away with the first half of the sentence.
The Irish usually works brilliantly. Sometimes it just closes itself for no known reason. Does anybody else see that?
That's the stability that I referenced, and as I say, there are a number of stability improvements.
That's okay then.
In the latest build. I'm not saying it. I mean, it still can do that. I've had, during its testing today, which did account for the majority of my day, I did have one instance of it randomly closing out on me, but only one in sort of multiple hours of testing across a broad range of websites.
That's okay, as long as it's not something weird about my machine. That's fair too. Yeah.
Had exactly the same thing happen on my Safari on my Mac M1 today. I was editing on my router, adding in a fixed IP address, and the Mac just dropped everything, just like that, just like Iris fell out of the water. And they've got trillions, as Andrew said.
Yeah. Andrew. I've downloaded the latest version of Iris, and I've just had a quick play. I think it does. It certainly seems a bit quicker on the BBC front web page. I've had a go at a few pages. Interesting though, I was looking at the TCP IP RISC dev site, but it's come up with an Nginx error. So I think something maybe down on that site at the moment.
Yeah, there's a reason why we didn't talk about the ticketing system tonight.
Right.
it was working quite happily over Christmas, as far as we know, and then we went to check it this afternoon, and it was down. And we'll just mark it as technical difficulties,
Which is
which may or may not be related to dodgy SD cards.
Yeah, but certainly, I guess, like everything else, the optimism going into 2022 has got to be right up there, hasn't it? Because fundamental bits around RISC-OS, the network stack, I know you can't say too much about Landman 98 and other things, but they're all big fundamental elements of the operating system that are getting lined up to be able to be supported a little easier going forward and bring us into the modern world, and that's got to be applauded.
Well, that was why we set RISC-OS developments up. Fundamentally, that's what RISC-OS developments. People have said to us, "Well, why did you set RISC-OS developments up in the first place? Why does it exist alongside rule?" And the simple answer is that there are projects that are big, be it web browser, be it TCP/IP, be it Wi-Fi, and there's some projects that can remain distinctly community projects and work best as community projects, and there are some things that need, full-time oversight and, heavier investment, they're bigger projects. Yeah. And that's why RISC-OS developments exist, because fundamentally, Richard and I were talking, and we felt that these things would not happen without this kind of a structure, and we felt that without that kind of development happening, then we couldn't necessarily see a future for RISC-OS past sort of a few more years. It's sort of in some ways reminiscent of the conversations that we had back when Acorn shut down, that you're trying to look for a sort of 10-year plan, and things didn't look good on a 10-year plan. So what can we do to sort of make sure that RISC-OS is still going 10 years from now? And the answer is, well, let's try and tackle some of these big projects. And that's why we set RISC-OS developments up, because at the end of the day, the hope is that by tackling the big things with RISC-OS developments as a sort of, essentially a sort of charitable foundation approach, then we can make a platform that is still viable for developers of all sizes, from the smallest amateur developers up to larger RISC-OS companies, going forwards into the 2020s.
Yeah, And I think, what goes unsung, I think, and you mentioned it yourself, GCC, and all the work that people have done on that, and the other bits and pieces, Chris Guards, with all his RISC supports, there's an awful lot of work that's gone, I guess, into enabling some of the work on Iris and the network stack.
Yeah.
Just to give you an update on the Iris browser that Andrew mentioned in passing, the improvements and showed to you all about the fonts. I've had a permanent pain with Iris on my IMX6. As some of you may be aware, I mentioned about running servers here. I run some RISC OS servers that has the ticket system, which is not there. I'll be on that tomorrow. We'll get that sorted as quick as we can. I'm sorry about that. But I have my own internal customer database where a lot of the people I see here have a record card, and I can update information as an ISP. I'm typing stuff in. And the biggest bugbear I've had with Iris over the last 6 months has been this problem of typing text in. Andrew, you're going to be very pleased to hear with the version that I downloaded earlier, I've just logged in, I've just added some text in, I've updated stuff, and it's almost instantaneous.
Correct.
So I am.
That was my take. That was my takeaway earlier. It did feel snappier, but I was having to try an awful lot of websites and do an awful lot of things. And there are still bugs. I'll be honest with you. I have found a bug in the latest build that I need to pass back to the programmer. I won't what it is, but the stuff that still needs to be fixed, and that's always the case. But it's feeling more robust. It's still distinctly beta software. As sorry, I'm looking over the faces trying to pull a name. But somebody said earlier, I think it was Chris, said it does still occasionally crash. There are elements that make it distinctly beta. We are going to be introducing a ticket system. I'd hope to sort of announce that alongside this build. But again, hopefully over this month, we'll be introducing a sort of ticket system so you can start feeding back things on Iris more formally. And that will help us transition from the beta phase through to a more general release later in the year, we hope.
Yeah, and there's one problem I was getting with the previous version, and that is that when it crashes, it leaves behind a couple of WebKit tasks and dynamic areas and things. Are you able to get those?
Yeah, I mean, it still does that. You can kill the WebKit processes just from the task manager, and if you use the forgive me, if you use the kill SOM script that comes with it, it should tidy up most of the other stuff at the same time. Again, I will probably be doing a pass over that. These are the kind of things that make it beta, and I know I've already said this. This is why people say to me, "Well, why don't you just make it available to everybody right now? People will understand." Yes, but it is distinctly beta. And you just explained why in the nicest possible way. And you can see from the demonstration earlier, it does feel more solid. We went through a period. The reason why you haven't had anything between October and now is that the stability seemed to go down considerably sort of in November, December, that sadly I was sort of having to write back to the program and saying, look, it's not staying upright for more than sort of 5-10 minutes for me on these builds. But this January build does seem considerably more robust than the November and December editions. So I think we're heading back in the right direction again.
Thank you.
Andrew.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for my camera. It seems to be very delayed. But anyway, so I have a few questions. The first question is about the TCP/IP stack.
Yep.
Did you guys manage to find a way to overcome the limitation of 96 maximum socket connection that we had on all the previous TCP stacks on RISC-OS?
I don't know the answer to that question. My guess would be that the answer is yes. because I believe that limitation would not be present in a modern TCP/IP stack. However, what I don't want to say to you is, oh yes, that's not a problem, because I would need to consult with the actual programmers of the stack to just confirm that. Obviously, if there are limitations in the way that the RISC OS API presents things via the SWIs, then those will still be present, because we've had to, if you think about it, all of the existing applications is designed to work a certain way and within certain set of parameters on the existing stack. So essentially what you're seeing, this is one of the things that's hard to grasp with the work you're seeing on the TCP/IP stack, is that as a user, you just see that everything works exactly the same as it did before. There's nothing magical about the fact that I'm showing the RISC OS desktop over VNC. And then you stop and think that actually the whole of the underlying TCP/IP system is completely different. That it's now running on the OpenBSD stack, on a modern, completely revised thing with completely revised sort of frame handling, MBUFs that can be literally thousands of times larger than the previous MBUFs could maximum capabilities. You've got a completely fundamentally different underneath, and yet all of the applications you're seeing work without missing a beat, because we put the necessary layers in place so that the APIs and things that things used to work with continue to work. Now, there are new commands and new extensions and new things possible. So one of the things that we touched on with performance is that effectively all the performance you're seeing is everything working on the old APIs and things. So what we're able to do is deliver essentially, what we're aiming for is sort of zero slowdown on existing applications working in the existing limited manners. But there will be new facilities that come on board, like jumbo frames, better support for sort of high-speed networking that are possible on a modern TCP/IP stack that simply weren't possible with the old stuff. And once software is sort of written with the new APIs and things in mind, I think we'll see additional gains as things go forwards. One of the things that might have been touched on, but I don't know whether the significance was necessarily tangible. The new resolver module, for example, supports resolving via both IPv4 and IPv6, which, if you think about what resolving is, it converts names to numbers. And in IPv6, the numbers are going to be massively different to the kind of numbers that you would get back with IPv4. So an application, you can't just magically give a program that was designed to expect 4 sets of 0 to 255 digits, a huge long IPv6 address. You can't fit sort of 64 bytes in, or whatever it is, into sort of 16. You need a TARDIS for that. So what we've done is create a resolver module that will actually adapt to the IP stack that it's running on, so that if you're running with an IPv4 system, the same SWIs and things can be used and get an IPv4 result. Or if you're running on a system with IPv4 and IPv6, you can get IPv4 results, you can get IPv6 results. It's a complete blend that will allow applications to be written to take advantage of IPv6, but degrade gracefully in an environment where only IPv4 is available, for example, on the old stack. So when people start writing code with the new stuff in mind, it won't require just the new stack. It will work correctly on all versions of the IP stack, so that we don't break compatibility either going backwards or going forwards. So there's been quite an effort to ensure compatibility, not just back to the old software, but also that future software will also work and be compatible with the old stack as well. So it's quite a sort of elegant and blended piece of software development to try and embrace both old and new all the way through. So going back to Paolo's question, limitations that exist within existing software, there's nothing much we can do about. It will still continue to work in the same way. But fundamentally, the stack is much more capable because it's based on modern BSD based code which doesn't have those kind of limitations. Or at least that's my understanding, but it would be worth me just having a chat with the programmer just to make sure I'm not talking complete garbage.
That's great. Another question is about Iris and the way the Unix lib were managed for for the DLL and all this stuff, because we had quite a lot of problems with RISC trying to make it work together. So is this new version kind of reconverging back, or
baby steps? Because my experience is that there is a mix and match of files out there, and it's not necessarily just a case of dump all the files in and it all everything magically works together. On a broad sense, that's the case, and that's how it should be. My experience with trying to make things like Otter and Cubezilla and all the various other sort of shared library programs coexist with each other and work smoothly together, is that it's not necessarily as straightforward as just dumping everything in the same master shared libs and letting it get on with it.
I totally agree. I mean,
so
yeah.
I'm saying, we've moved from a system where everything was was included inside to where sort of more modules and things are being sort of provided. They're still in the application so that the application can find the latest builds if you haven't actually installed them, but you can actually install things alongside other things in a more system-friendly way. That's why we've seen the sort of releases of the new GCC stuff. Things that were sort of not necessarily public releases have become public releases, which smooths the process. So we're moving in the right direction, but I will say that it's baby steps, because I don't want to end up in a situation where installing Iris's shared libs completely knackers everything that is going on with other applications. I mean, it shouldn't do, but it does need to be managed carefully. And we could very easily end up in a DLL hell type situation, and that's what I'm being very, very cautious about, especially when Iris is being offered on where our technical support time for it is limited, because it tends to be that this all falls on my shoulders, and I kind of buckled last year under the weight of things, not just that, but just generally. 2021 was a tough year for me. I feel a lot better for having had a break at Christmas, but I do not want to repeat of last year if I can possibly help it.
No, I understand. I wasn't anything. It's just I'm just checking to understand how we can actually work on other stuff. Steve mentioned that's why we have Pacman. Unfortunately, Steve, the update of the DLS infrastructure forces everything that's been built with the previous one to be recompiled. So it's not that simple, actually, which is why I'm asking Andrew how works are going, because they have to merge back at some point, but it has to be something that I'm going to say something that is a bit controversial, but there has to be communication. That's key. Sorry, Richard, because I know you did at the ROCC presentation about communication. When I remark communication, it's only technical communication, not business. I don't have any interest in business information.
I understand what you're saying, Paolo. Thank you.
And that's absolutely correct. And I am in discussions with various people behind the scenes on that from the different projects. So, yes. But I will say that I got myself into a right mess with, not trying to knock Pacman, because what Pacman does is brilliant, but shared DLLs I did get into a right mess trying to update things with Pacman. I probably did it wrong, but nevertheless, everything went to hell in a handbasket, and Cubezilla and Otter just completely collapsed and wouldn't load, so there's more to it than meets the eye, I think, is really all I'm trying to say. I think this is not an unsolvable problem, but it's going to need a little bit of give and take on all sides in order to try and get something that's as good as we would like for RISC-OS.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it's not a provocation or anything. It's just making sure that at least we know when we have to recompile RISC and why.
We're back to the case of this is why it's beta.
Yeah.
Andrew, I can confirm it still knocks out Python straight away. I've just downloaded the latest version.
If you
I've
put
run
the
Iris.
if you put the Python libraries in the libraries that are needed for Python, if you just shove them inside the shared libs inside Iris, you will probably find that that's okay.
But then I'll go down the same rabbit hole usually. I do everything via Pacman, and I don't like to move the libraries about. I've got a bypass. I simply run a reset the library back to Python's standard ones. But it's I think you've got to fix it at some point. It's not.
It's worth pointing out that some Linux systems are moving away from the traditional idea of package management and heading in the direction of things like app images, where all the files are all sort of bundled together in the way that they are still on Macs, for instance. It's like us on RISC-OS.
Early days on that for RISC-OS. I've only just got used to a package manager.
As Andrew has said, this is why the software that we've got is classified as beta. There are still things that need to be sorted, smoothed, and checked out, and that's why we try to run things. You've mentioned that one, John. I occasionally have something that trips up with one of the obscure little packages that I run here, and then I can't get Iris to load, and I just go, oh yeah, fine, and I quit it. But Andrew's aware of that, and we'll work through things. And when we're happy that it can go out and it will cause the minimal amount of disruption to everybody, that's when we'll be very happy to let all and sundry play with this. It will be great when everyone can have Iris full and free.
And then one little thing about what Andrew said about assembly. Actually, Andrew, not only I agree with you. By the way, guys, thank you for the presentation. So I forgot before I was ready to ask a question. Thank you both, Andrew and Richard. But actually, in this modern days and age, the way we used to write assembly on the original ARM 2 and ARM 3 doesn't make much more sense anyway, because of the way pipelines work, caches work. So it's definitely better to move towards a compiled language, even for performance. In many cases, compilers have demonstrated to be much better at improving performance. By the way, compiler improvement on performance are only up to 10% of the code. What really matters for real good performance is the architecture of the code itself. So on that one, I totally agree that it's time to move away from assembly, and it's going to make RISC-OS better, actually faster. It will. On modern architecture, of course, if you try to run it then on older CPUs that have much smaller pipelines. So one of the things that I've read on the role forum, a lot of times people comment, oh, but I had to add this NOP operation between these two assembly structures. That's because it's called, actually, there's a technical term for it. It's called structural hazard, and it's the way pipelines work. And if things are not synchronized correctly, in modern ARM, the ARM multiplexer, the code multiplexer, will add a NOP operation for us that we don't see. In older ARM, it will just give up, and bad things will happen to the code. So this is the way modern CPU works, and it's like this on the x86 or the RISC-V or ARM or whatever you're going to find. So it's the way the modern CPU architecture works.
Okay, Andrew, I have a general sort of niche question concerning loosely the internet stack. I think I'm trying to use. I'm messing around with my network a lot at the moment, and I'm with lots of headless pies, and I'm mostly using SSH to manage the pies. I would like to manage them from RISC-OS, but the SSH support on RISC-OS is flaky, shall we say. I just wondered if it's an area in which you might venture into. I've got to open. I'm going
to defer at that one. it's not on my personal radar. If there's demand, we can look into it. I was under the impression that, I should say, it's not something I have ever used, or at least not in anger. I think I've looked at it, but that's about as far as I was under the impression that SSH was okay. And certainly with the latest stuff from sort of the likes of Chris Gransden and the GCC Auto Builder stuff, that it basically worked.
It sort of works under Nettle, but it is flaky, and there's no way of getting anything fixed. And
isn't there a command line SSH stuff through the?
That's what I'm talking command line SSH. Yes.
Yeah. I'm just wondering why you're bringing Nettle. And I know there is a version that works with Nettle. I thought you could just hit F12 and do sort of SSH.
Well, there's Open SSH, but it's got lots of bugs. It's just not like using any of the other systems.
Okay.
I'd rather use the RISC-OS to do something as simple as terminal control of my headless machines, but I'm forced often to use the Mac, which has its own problems. Okay, I just wondered if it was it is in the area of networking and TCP/IP and all that sort of stuff. But
I mean, it's essentially a program as opposed to a stack thing, so not on our immediate roadmap. But you know, if there's demand and what we have is significantly flawed, stroke broken, that may be something that we can look at. I just don't want to make commitments to things that.
No.
Given the limited programmer resources, if I say, "Oh yes, we'll look at that," that's allocating work to a programmer, and the programmers will scream at me like nobody's business because they've already got huge burdens on their shoulders. I don't want to make a promise that I cannot keep.
Fair enough. It's just that really most programmers on the Linux world use the terminal to control things, and it would be quite nice to be able to do it from RISC-OS.
Agreed. The differences between RISC-OS and Linux terminal-wise do seem quite. There's a gulf there, shall we say? There
is a gulf. There's a fair amount of stuff on Pac-Man. You can it's mostly ported stuff, so you can make RISC-OS look like Linux basically. It's missing. You can download the stuff from Pac-Man. There's something missing. There's DNS utils I'd quite like. No one seems to have ported that. I probably ought to get into how to port things really, but next step. Okay.
Something that Andrew and I can talk about maybe and discuss with other people. I'm sure we can bring it into a conversation somewhere and see what.
Just see if you can. I think there is an interest in there, but it's obviously a bit niche and a bit nerdy. But
one of my support staff, when doing things on my behalf, does use SSH at the command line an awful lot and does resolve things. So yes, it would be nice if we could do that more fully spec'd on RISC-OS. But bearing in mind, I'm not the technical side and I don't promise anything. But yeah, it will buzz around my head now.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Hi, Kevin. Now, Kevin, your microphone is going on and off very rapidly, flickering between off and on. So we're coming across as just almost static.
Yeah, your mic's off at the moment.
Okay, that looks a lot better.
Right, good. That was one of my fat fingers, I'm afraid. Yeah, the question was with Iris, is it possible to rearrange the bookmarks or to put them in folders? Because all I do is if I save something, they just go into anyone.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of those. We haven't really done a deep dive on bookmarking since that was first implemented.
Yeah, it's not a major thing.
No. Again, we're in the area of this is why it's beta software and not release versions. That, as you say, it does feel like the bookmark stuff could do with another sort of polish pass before it's classified as a release version. And yeah, I agree. Those kind of things would be extremely desirable.
Yeah, good. And
I don't know quite how we'll do the user interface for that, but certainly bookmarks do need a look-see before we hit a public release, I think.
Right. Well, I've looked at the new version that you just put up, and it does feel a bit faster on the sites that I use, so that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't know where the extra performance is necessarily coming from, beyond the fact that obviously it's the latest stuff with the latest tools, and maybe we're seeing a little bit of a boost from the latest compiler tools and the latest optimizations in the.
I mean, the other question I would ask is what's the need for a CubeZilla or Otter browser when you've got Iris now? To my mind,
the short goal is that the goal is that there isn't a need for them beyond academic interest. Yeah. In practice, there are features that are present in those browsers that are not necessarily available in Iris at the moment. So, I can think of sort of things like ad blocking is present in CupZilla, I think, which isn't in Iris. So there are features that are in those, but then those are much closer to being sort of release products rather than beta products. That's they had a sort of 10-year head start on us. So
yeah. Okay. Thanks very much.
At the end of the day, that is, I'll go back to what I said. People keep saying, Andrew, why you class it as beta software? You should release it already. There are things that are missing. There are things that need severe polish passes because that's what beta software is.
Yeah. Okay. Cheers.
Yep. Anyway, Happy New Year, anyway.
Thank you.
Hi, Andrew. Just a quickie question. I think currently, if you buy, you go buy Otter on the store to get Iris, don't you? Are you looking at it as a paid-for option? And if so, on release, any idea what sort of pricing that might be?
Big fat zero.
Big fat zero. Oh, right.
Yeah,
I was expecting something, I must admit.
No, I mean, we've always been committed to the concept that Iris was going to be a free product because on other platforms, web browsers are free. And if you present a new user with a platform and say, hey, this is the platform where you have to spend $50 to get a web browser, you're going to get laughed at.
Yeah, fair enough,
And much as, the commercial Andrew, who's been operating a business for 25 years, would like to say that, the practical reality is that we need more users. We need a healthier operating system.
Yeah, so it has to be free because of that.
It has to be free. Now, then you say to me, well, Andrew, then why are you charging £50 for it on Pling Store right now?
Because of development.
Beta. And the answer is that we have shareholders who say you should absolutely charge for it. Forget everything else. It should definitely be commercial. And then you have other shareholders who say, no, it should be totally free all the time. So we have to sort of marry or balance the two extremes and yet still produce a sustainable product, because we've seen what happens in the past where you get a browser and it's released and then it's not maintained.
Yeah.
The resource, funding stops, the browser, it peters on for a little while. I mean, there's still people, I think, who still fire up Fresco once in a while, but, you're not likely to sort of say, Fresco's my go-to browser for RISC-OS these days.
Yeah.
And, when enthusiasm begins to dip, you have to have plans in place to try and speed development forwards. And one of the ways we can do that is by getting a little bit of funding behind us. And so the kind of it's a trade-off. The feeling is that the kind of person who wants to have early access to Iris on RISC-OS is probably the kind of person who is a keen RISC-OS user. And a keen RISC-OS user probably doesn't mind chucking in a little bit of cash to support the development of a web browser for the platform.
Yeah.
Some people have put in a lot of cash and supported the company, and that's why we have shareholder builds.
Yes.
Not everybody wants to be a shareholder. I totally get that. I totally get where they're coming from. the O-browser mechanism allows us to say, look, here's a way you can spend a little bit of money as a one-off purchase. I mean, we've had people. I had an email over Christmas while I was on holiday, and it was somebody said, I bought O-browser sort of in 2016 or 2017 or whenever it was first released, essentially, the very first show. Because I've lost my CD. What's my, I want to claim the version on Pling Store.
Mm-hmm.
So I activated his copy on Pling Store for him.
Right.
So it is a sort of one-off purchase of O-browser. So you can it's that sort of tiering to allow people to do the little smaller amount, but still contribute to RISC-OS developments overall. So and then the people in between. So there's all extremes of.
That sounds fine. Yeah.
So that's the logic. And as I say, I'm hoping 2022 is the year of Iris. I'm hoping that when Vince comes around to do his RISC-OS awards at the end of this year, we'll be able to have Iris in the sort of new release category rather than as the sort of show of initiative category.
I think it's greatly appreciated all the work that you do for this, because as you say, it's sort of like the big blocker for other people to look at RISC-OS. As you say, if you haven't got a viable web browser, what are you doing? So it's greatly appreciated the work that everyone's doing that goes into this.
This is it. The majority, you look at what the average user uses a computer for in 2022. It's browsing websites.
That's
the concept of actual software beyond the web browser is.
Can I add my thanks as well? Well done, all the hard work.
Thanks, Chris.
Right, thanks very much, Andrew.
Thank you.
Anybody got any more questions?
Just a way of speeding up Iris, if anyone's interested. 20% speed improvement.
Stick it in RAM disk?
No, I'm running Pi-hole here, and it's definitely made everything crisper. For those that Pi-hole it's a DNS server, and it blocks adware, malware, spyware, and it's blocking about 20% of the traffic that it's asked to serve, and it really has made the RISC-OS certainly speeds up Iris, and it certainly speeds up all my other browsers. At the next mug meeting, I shall be demonstrating it as a plug. But I could show you a screen now. You can just have just one screen of the dashboard. You can see what it's done. If anyone wants to see it. Okay, I'll try and share a screen.
There is a small charge for that.
Small charge. Can you see a rather dull website?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Right, so if I go to Pi-hole admin down here, and there it is. That's the front page of Pi-hole. I've not logged in, so I've got nothing interactive. But this is in the last 24 hours. My house has sent out 8,900 web requests, of which 2,222 have been blocked. If I log in, you can see a bit more detail. Right, that's now logged in. If I go to see this one here, device metrics us.amazon.com, 1,682 hits in the last 24 hours. It's shocking what's going on.
Out of curiosity, John, can you do this administration in Iris?
I can administer from Iris. This is a Mac you're looking at.
No, I was just curious. So thank you.
Yes, now I've got the new Iris, I'll give it a go. So it's a very useful program to run. And if I go to Tools, it's got a very nice view of the network, and this is these are all the things on my home network. Edimax, that's an access point, another access point. That's an Amazon Echo.
Can we just have your bank details?
That's a Mac Mini Echo Show. That's in the kitchen. Pi VI. That's Pi number 6. That's running somewhere in the house. Echo by the bed. LG TV. That's a Pi 400 wireless.
Sorry, I'm not sure about that.
Oh, that should just spoke up then. ARMX 6. That's my telephone. That's my router. RISC PC. That's Julie's RISC PC, and that's an XPS Windows machine. And then you've got some things that aren't used, but it's I can show you a picture of it if I just let me just see if I can choose video pin. No, I can't do it on some Zooms. I can actually make me go full screen, but there's my network patch panel. You can see a Draytech router from Richard of Orpheus. So it's the one you saw. It's still going strong. It's an 8 switch with 8 switches there. But this little thing here, that's the Raspberry Pi that's running the Pi-hole ad blocker. It's just plugged straight in.
That's a very impressive little bit of breadboarding there on that.
Well, it's got to be neat, hasn't it?
Not according to my house, it hasn't.
Just needs a touch of varnish there, John.
Touch of varnish, yes. But at the next mug meeting, Saturday sometime, I will demonstrate how to install one of these. It's all very straightforward. And if you've got a router, it's well worth having it.
I'll help you out, John. It's the 5th of February at 2 o'clock.
5th of February. That's in 2 o'clock, is it?
Yeah.
Saturday, 2 o'clock, 5th of February. I will demonstrate how to get Pi-hole working on a Raspberry Pi and put all your web traffic through it. And I'll also talk about some of the drawbacks.
Which comes back to something that that might interest Andrew and Richard, is that the configuration tool needs to take some adherence to using alternative DNS servers to the ones that are offered up by DHCP.
We think we need to take a fairly radical axe to the existing network setup, to be perfectly honest with you. It was adequate in the 1990s. It's really not in 2022. And there's a lot of, I mean, it fundamentally works, but there's so much that really it just doesn't take on board about how networks are these days, that it needs to be done carefully. As I may have said before, I don't think any of the modern operating systems get networking right. So I think we need to sort of take some of the better ideas of a number of platforms to create something that is.
Yeah, well, Windows seems to have gone. Yeah, Windows seems to have
Windows
gone
is a dog's breakfast on networking in Windows 10. The same thing's duplicated across half a dozen or more Windows, some of which allow you to edit it, some of which you don't. Sometimes things get knocked through. It's a mess. And stuff that should be so simple, like setting a static IP address, is just an exercise in pain on Windows. But Linux doesn't make sort of networking stuff completely user-friendly either. It's still a mixture of command line and UI and multiple UIs. Mac's probably the closest to being what you'd want, but I've heard people not happy with the Mac one either. So what we're going to do is try and blend the best bits of each to try and create something that is as good as we can possibly make it.
Good to hear.
The person we've got in mind for that has familiarity with a number of platforms. So, it's not one of these things where it's being tackled by a guy who's purely used to the way Acorn did it. So hopefully we can sort of bring in a bit of a sort of general knowledge into cracking this particular nut.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, the RISC-6 network configuration splits things up quite nicely as well.
Yeah, I mean, we have been offered that from, elements of that from its author. It's helpful. I'm still not convinced that necessarily. It breaks things down differently, and there are definitely some good elements there. But it doesn't do much to address things like profiles, which need to be a key element of a modern network setup, for example, so that you can, if you're using a laptop at home, for example, you need to be able to quickly select a setup that's appropriate for your home or for a work environment and what have you. There's nothing like that in the RISC-6 stuff. So those profiles need to be auto-selectable based on what's going on around, what you're plugged into, whether you're on Wi-Fi, etc. The system needs to be intelligent and smart and cope with the idea that a computer isn't just in one place all the time.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things we need to take on board, because as we move into Wi-Fi and things like that, any kind of network setup needs to be aware ahead of time of what's good, the fluidity of networking in the modern world in a way that just RISC-OS never has been previously. That's one of the tricky things about modern networking, to be honest with you, is that a lot of the stack level stuff is actually pretty static under the hood, and a lot of the fluidity that you see with sort of Wi-Fi networking, where you're switching between access points and even different Wi-Fi networks as you move around, that's really not baked in at stack level. I mean, it is and it isn't, but I mean, the fundamentals of the TCP/IP stack are pretty rigid. So trying to present a fluid experience to the user does have quite a few challenges associated with it. It's one of the reasons we chose the OpenBSD stack in the first place, and something that we have an eye on in terms of the configurability. Whether we'll be able to pull it off will remain to be seen.
Okay. Can I have a word with Richard briefly? Richard, yes, Pi-hole does work. You can administer it using Iris. I've got it alongside me here. I'm not going to share it. You have to come to the Saturday show.
Okay. Thanks, John.
It's ARMX6, so slightly slow, really, but it's working.
One thing I will say is that you can get a speed up on Iris just by dropping it into the RAM disk and running it from RAM disk. That Iris and sort of associated programs like the font stuff do seem to benefit from fast disk access.
Okay, that's worth a go. Yeah.
I mean, it's not night and day, but depending on what you're doing,
I'll take 5%.
It can help, is all I'm going to say.
Right.
That's what the mafia usually say, isn't it?
Is it? Is that greedy?
5%. I think they want more than 5%.
Excuse the cough. I'm suffering from COVID. Yeah.
Hopefully not the down the network cables variant.
Yeah, no, sorry. I keep spraying my screen, so you're all safe.
Not one of those
Interesting, you
viruses.
said it's not Omicron and wouldn't tell us what it was. So perhaps I developed my own strain.
Why haven't you got an X across your forehead?
Oh, I've got the bell, book, and candle. Unclean, unclean. Bring out your dead.
The white cross will be across your front door.
Yes, yeah, that's right. The blood red cross. Anyway, I've got to go. Many thanks for a very interesting talk all round, guys. Thank you very much.
Take care, Chris.
Take care, Chris.
Yes,
Keep
Chris.
safe.
Any other questions? Okay, well,
I'll stop recording now then, but
Recording, right.
people want to chat on, then obviously they're perfectly welcome to do so. It's free.
Ooh.
Wow. Not much in life is, let's face it. Except COVID, that is absolutely free.
Just going to say, just in case anybody hasn't heard, they may have done, hopefully, the show is, Wakefield show's on in May now, not April. So,
Do you know, I was wondering whether I should mention that, and I thought I might get shouted at if I did. You know, a spoiler alert. Go on then. What's the date? Is it the 21st?
21st of May, if I'm
21st of May.
1st of May, yeah, you put that in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Straight in the diary.
We had to move it because the hotel haven't finished refurbishing. It's all held up because of material supplies, I presume.
21st of May.
Honestly, I was actually quite pleased that it was May rather than April. So,
well, we used to be in May years back, I believe.
a long time ago. Well, there's a slight chance of better weather, we hope, and the more further into summer that you push it, chances are the one would hope was slightly better on the COVID front as well. So
yeah. Funnily enough, though, the weather's always been pretty reasonable on our show dates. We've been
don't jinx it,
like
Rick.
that.
Jinx it.
Had the odd shower sometimes during the show, but that doesn't matter when you're indoors, does it?
Yeah, we've
I can recall quite a few fairly rough journeys across the M62. I'll be honest.
Everywhere you start to move away from May because it kept clashing with the FA Cup final or something horrid.
Oh wow! It might still do, but tough luck.
I remember people watching the FA Cup. At one stage, we were doing big monitors that were also TVs. And I remember somebody watching the FA Cup stand on the monitor that was also a TV.
Yeah. No, I think
on your phone these days.
We didn't have a huge amount of choice of the day, and whatever it clashes with, tough. It doesn't clash with the Big Ben show, but I think it's within about a week of it, or whatever they call it. Do they call it the Big Ben show now? It might have a slightly different name, but it's you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Expo or something like that.
Yeah, the one in the Netherlands, anyway.
Yeah. That's why we moved. Well, we decided to resurrect the Mug Summer Show this year, just online, really.
Yeah.
Try something different, but we thought, well, July, that's going to be far enough away from Wakefield and other shows, and now you can Scotland up behind us again.
Well, we're not too near though. I mean, the thing is that we can't stray too late into summer because then you're up against weddings.
Yeah.
It's quite a popular, or has been quite a popular wedding venue.
Yeah. But as I was saying earlier, I won't jinx it, but sitting out down by the canal at the pub on many occasions.